There's got to be another way that I can be with this experience that doesn't feel so toxic and painful and debilitating. And so for me, what I imagined that would look like was forgiveness. And I had no idea. I don't think forgiveness is something you can just announce, like, I'm going to forgive this person and suddenly that's what you're living with. I think forgiveness is one of the more difficult mandates of love. But I also knew I want to feel better. And so I didn't know how to forgive this man, but what I felt like I could do was I could empathize with him. And so for me, what that looked like was viewing him not only through the lens that he's a killer, but viewing him through the lens of his humanity and connecting with what I imagine to be his experience. And
Welcome, everyone, to the Spiritual Forum. I'm so glad you're here. And it's a beautiful spring day in Wisconsin. I think winter may be behind us. And we've got a bunch of goose couples and some sandhill cranes that are visiting us. And just so excited that we'll be having babies here on our property soon. And it's just so exciting to be a part of life. So I want to thank everybody who joins us on this podcast and remind you that this is a voice of hope, inspiration, and awakening in a world that benefits from hope, inspiration, and awakening. So let me introduce you to my guest. Very excited for you to meet him. His name is Scott Stabile, and he is a passionate love advocate who believes there's no force more powerful than love to create real connection and healing in our world, which is what we're all up for now. Scott guides transformational breathwork journeys and leads personal empowerment workshops internationally. His inspirational posts have attracted a huge and devoted social media following, including more than 350,000 Facebook fans. That's amazing. I've got to find out how you did that. Scott is the author of Big Love, The Undeniable Joy of Following Your Heart, and also the book Enough as You Are. Both of those are great titles, great messages. Welcome, Scott.
thank you so much, Reverend Carol. I'm so happy to be with you.
I am too. I'm happy to be with you too. I think, the title of your book, Big Love, it's like there's nothing that we could use more of, I think, than love, and just to make that decision to be that and to love really, really in a big and dramatic way. So I really appreciate what you're doing for the world through your writing.
Thank you so much. And you, and I agree wholeheartedly about
Yeah,
love.
we're gonna get into that. We're gonna get into that as
Yeah.
what can we do for this world? All right, so you agreed to do some rapid fire questions before we get into your story. So here's a couple of them. Do you have a mantra, words or phrases, or a brief message that you live by?
I mean, two come to mind. I would say that when I'm struggling, like, and all my tools don't seem to be working to get me out of a dark or hopeless place, the very famous mantra, "This too shall pass," has been incredibly helpful to me for many years, in part because it's just a reminder that everything ultimately does pass at some point. So even when we're really, really going through it, we can trust that that's not going to last forever. So that's been really helpful for me. And then also years ago, a very wise woman put her hand atop my hand and looked me in the eyes and said, "There's no justification for lack of love." And I won't go into all the circumstances around that moment, but those words really, really hit me. I resisted them at first because the mind is expert at coming up with justifications to not love. But when I really allowed myself to just rest in what she was saying, I understood that absolutely anytime I'm operating outside of the energy of love, I can trust that I'm in my mind, I'm in my ego, and that's not ultimately where I want to be directing my life from. So there's always opportunity to return to a place of love.
Those are both really, really, really powerful. Thank you so much for sharing that. Oh, this one I think you'll like. What is a lesson that you have learned from someone in your life?
Oh, wow. It's funny. Yeah, what's hitting me now is actually I was in a cult for many years. I had a guru, and for whatever reason, in this moment, he's the person that came to me and as a model of how I don't want to show up. So I think that lessons come in different ways, and sometimes we're shown very clearly through others. We're inspired around how we would like to be and how we would like to be showing up, and sometimes we see examples that can serve as, I guess, warnings, for lack of a better word, which is not to say that he didn't also show up in many beautiful ways, but ultimately, when I reflect on my experience in that cult and with that teacher, I feel most in this moment alive in the understanding of like how we can be a teacher in what I see to be a good way, and how we can be a teacher in what I see to be a more manipulative and self-serving way. And so he modeled the latter example more often than I would like to model that example.
I think that's really an interesting point because we learn from everybody. And
Absolutely.
it's just not the good and the happy and the wonderful role models that we learn from because we can choose to be like somebody or not like somebody. And how would you know what not to be if you hadn't had that experience?
Exactly. And there were so many gifts in that experience, so much love and so much beauty in the community. I mean, there was a lot of light there as well. But yeah, it's important to see like, hey, this is not going to be the path for me.
Yeah. Yeah. Great.
Yeah.
Thank you, Scott. All right. Oh, no, I have one more. I have one more. This is easy.
All
This is easy.
right.
What's a
Sure.
favorite place? What's your favorite place or a favorite place?
Well, the Italian Alps, the Dolomites, that's certainly one of my favorite places on the planet. I love hiking, I love mountains, I love nature, and that area of the country is just so strikingly beautiful. And yeah, part of my heart is there for sure all the time.
Okay, thanks for that.
Yeah.
It's so interesting. I ask that question of my guests sometimes, and people will say, "Oh, it's my meditation cushion," or it's. And I'm thinking, no, I really just want to know what your favorite place
Yeah.
is.
What about you? What's a favorite place for you?
Oh, it's kind of interesting. I do really love where I live with all of the nature, but I
Okay.
also, strangely, I've grown to love Paris. I
Oh,
never
nice.
expected to love Paris. In fact, I kind of went there begrudgingly because it was kind of a stopover, and it kind of got in me, my veins in a way, and I've been back a few times. And normally I don't really like cities, but it's a place that just kind of feels a little bit like home. So that's a favorite place.
I love that. Yeah, it's a
Yeah,
beautiful city for
yeah,
sure.
it is, and the vibe there is just really, I love it. So and this style, there's something about it. So anyway, that's one of
All
them.
right.
So
And how about a favorite mantra, if I may ask? Because I am curious. What would be one for you?
oh, I think mine would be love one another.
Yeah,
I
beautiful.
think the teaching of Jesus and other great souls is love one another. And for
Yeah,
me, that expands really big, like beyond the species boundary, that we need to love everybody, everything
yeah,
that's alive, all of life.
yeah,
And to just
beautiful.
remember that. So this is one of the reasons I was really interested in talking to you because you're all about love, and it's a journey, isn't it? It's a journey.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
often the hardest choice to make is to love. It's very
Yes.
easy. Our mind is expert at going to other places that don't involve love,
Yeah.
and so
And what I
challenges.
love about
Yeah.
your book is that you're so honest about that. Like you tell honest stories about your struggles and how you've evolved to being what do you call a passionate love advocate. Even stories that I think, normally people would be embarrassed to tell. You just come right out and talk about the guy on the airplane seat that you judged or whatever,
Uh-huh.
and
Yeah.
the struggle of that. And I love that. And I want you to tell your story, but I will say right off the bat that y- well, I wrote these notes. Your book's a series of raw disclosure stories and such authenticity. And I think to me, that is the spiritual path. I mean, I think the path of love is a spiritual path, but also really finding that authentic expression. Like, who were you created to
Yeah.
be without all of the masks and all of the stuff that we put on ourselves? And that's why I believe this is a very spiritual conversation. It's really about becoming who we are.
Absolutely. Yeah, just honoring who we are, right? Remembering who we are. It
Yeah.
isn't, I mean, it is a becoming, certainly, but it's really just a becoming of allowing, acceptance and allowance of ourselves to be and express what feels most honest within. And that is a profoundly can be a profoundly challenging path to take. And the more you do it, the more willing you are to just express yourself authentically, the more natural it becomes to do so, and the more ungrounded you're likely to feel when you're actually aligned with the conditioning, right? And with the fear and with the insecurity, and expressing that, that's going to start to feel less natural and less okay.
Right. Yes. Yeah. And so that really guides our discernment then to know what is real and what is not, and what to follow and what not, and what is,
Yeah.
what is appropriate for us. And not appropriate's not a good word, but what is authentic for us. So, okay, okay,
Yeah.
okay, okay. We're starting to
Okay.
get into it, and I want to pull
Okay.
back a little bit because your
Okay.
story is fascinating, and to get to this place of being this advocate for love, you've gone through some really dark places, and I'm wondering if you could just kind of briefly tell your spiritual story. Like I said, to me, a spiritual story is your story to authenticity, and just
Yeah.
share a little bit about that.
Sure. I mean, well, if a few things come to mind, I guess, I mean, one of the biggest events of my life was losing my parents. So that was at 14 years old. My parents were shot to death, and that completely uprooted my life. And I mean, in
Hmm.
obvious ways, suddenly I was without parents. I was a freshman just beginning high school and had to move in with my eldest sister and her husband and son, and switch schools, in ninth grade, while at the same time really coming into like recognizing I'm a gay kid. So there was a lot happening in at 14, which informed certainly a lot of who I am. And I feel like I need to say that it's I don't think it's easy to necessarily say with certainty how what we've experienced has informed who we are today. So what I can say, like I am a big proponent of love. I believe in the power of love and the energy of love as deeply as I believe in anything. I make a lot of noise for that belief. And I can't confidently say I wouldn't have arrived here had I not lost my parents and been a gay person. And you know what I'm saying? It's
Hmm.
like,
Hmm.
it's impossible for me to make that direct connection to what I'm talking about and how I'm living my life today. Um, and all we know is what we've experienced, and I trust that everything in my path has led me to where I am today. So both things are true. I would say one of the gifts of having gone through the trauma of losing my parents was getting myself to a place of forgiveness with the man who took their lives. And and that wasn't something that happened right away for me either. At 14, that wasn't in any way what I was thinking about. I was just hating him and wanting him to die and wanting him to suffer. And these were the thoughts when I would think about this man that would play through my head. And then when I was in my early 20s, and I was becoming more aware of how I was feeling in relation to what I was thinking, which is to say, when I was thinking about this man who took my parents' lives, I was all I would feel inside was like a lot of tension and anxiety and a tightness in my chest. And I recognized that I don't want to feel this way every time I think about this man. Like there's got to be another way that I can be with this experience that doesn't feel so toxic and painful and debilitating. And so for me, what I imagined that would look like was forgiveness. And I had no idea. I don't think forgiveness is something you can just announce, like, I'm going to forgive this person, and suddenly that's what you're living with. I think forgiveness is one of the more difficult mandates of love. But I also knew I want to feel better. And so I didn't know how to forgive this man, but what I felt like I could do was I could empathize with him. And so for me, what that looked like was viewing him not only through the lens that he's a killer, but viewing him through the lens of his humanity and connecting with what I imagine to be his experience. And what that looked like for me was he must feel very angry. He must feel very lost. He must feel very confused. He must feel unloved and unseen. Because to me, anyone who would choose to murder other people must feel some combination of all of those things, or you would not make those choices. And I thought, well, I feel confused and I feel unseen and I feel unloved and I feel angry and I feel lost. And even the violence, Carol, which was like something I thought I could never relate to, that kind of violence. When I got honest with myself, I was like, well, you were wanting him dead. You were imagining horrible deaths for him. It's not something you were going to act on, but like, don't pretend you can't imagine what it's like to be violent and to think violent thoughts. And so even that, it was like, wow, even that is a story I can relate to. And so suddenly what I was experiencing with him, the more I was intentional about empathizing with him, I was not seeing him as a murderer. I was seeing him as another human being who is experiencing profound struggle in this reality, as am I. And and what was happening for me is I could feel my heart open. I could feel, by being really intentional with my empathy, that my heart was just doing what all of our hearts do, right? Which is just allowing for the expression of love. And so then I was thinking about him and I was like, I feel love for this man. And then the more I was practicing in empathy and the more I was allowing this love to express, what I realized was I have forgiven him. Like, and it wasn't this active choice of forgiveness, it was an active choice of empathy that took me down this path that opened me up and opened my heart until forgiveness is what presented itself. And that's all I felt for half my life now, was just a sense of love and forgiveness for him. And when I think of him, it's with an open heart, it's with a loving heart. And I have to say that that has been one of the greatest gifts that I have been given in my life, because forgiveness is freedom. Like, I was tethered to this experience through this toxic cord where all it was eliciting in me was hatred and disgust and anger. And none of that exists for me, which isn't to say that the pain of losing my parents in such a horrible way is not still something I feel, but I'm not connected to him as an enemy through that pain. That's not what I feel towards him anymore, is this hatred and disgust. What I feel for him is just love. You know, he made an awful choice, and we all make awful choices. And his is, yes, an extreme. Murder is an extreme choice under the umbrella of unhealthy choices. And yet, even that doesn't have to define who he is as a human being. You know, so, and for me, that's love. Like, that is love in action. Love. When I speak about love, I see love as just energy, and it's an energy alive within us and outside of us, and it's available to us all the time. And it's an energy that informs compassion, kindness, forgiveness, all of these beautiful energies that when we're aligned with them, we feel better about who we are, about who others are, and about our world in general. That was a very long answer. Is that enough for now
Well,
around that?
I think we've got a few ways we can go with this. There's so much that you said. First of all, I just want to acknowledge you for the way you described how the forgiveness process was for you, because I think you said at some point, forgiveness presented itself. I love that. I love that. It's not like something that you actively did, like, I've got to forgive. And
Yeah,
and that you also allowed yourself to go through the burden of all of the bad feelings and the visions of this person experiencing harm, and all of that, because that's so human. When somebody hurts
absolutely.
us, the first thing you want to do, I don't care how good of a person you are, if you're so good that you don't have these feelings, you're probably bypassing it, because your natural response is, I want them to feel what I'm feeling. This is
Yeah,
horrible and I want to get rid of this. And I feel like if they just felt that somehow I would feel better. And I think the way you described that was just so, so interesting. And I think that also what you said is that forgiveness is one of the mandates of love. Very, very interesting definition, or interesting way of talking about it. And then ultimately, you talked about love as being the energy. And to me, I'm going to bring in my own spirituality, because that's the definition of God that I respond to, that God is love, and
yeah,
that's what God is. Not this being that's dictating anything, or but
yeah,
but wherever love is, and love is planted in us, love is everywhere, and we can be an expression of that, and that it is this magnificent, magnetic, fabulous energy that we are here to participate in, and to be vessels of. And if we just awaken to that and connect with empathy, like you said, empathize, I just have these visions of what the world would be. And yet, we also have to be okay with what the world is,
yeah.
is like,
It's
and love it as it is.
it's challenging. And yes, to everything you said, absolutely. And the thing that I really want to just remind anyone watching or listening is that it is never too late to deepen and strengthen your connection to love and your connection to self-love. And the reason I talk and teach so much about self-love is because ultimately the relationship we have with ourselves informs how we show up for everyone and everything in this world. There for my money, there's nothing that informs it more than how we are relating to ourselves. And that is why, like, prioritizing your relationship to self is always of service to all. I think
Mm-hmm.
people sometimes, Carol, get caught up in this idea of self-love as selfish, and if I'm giving my energy to myself, and especially women, because women are conditioned to always take care of others, always put others' interests first, others' concerns first. And this conditioning is nonsense, but it's heavy. When that's the air we're breathing for a lifetime, even if we are consciously aware that this is a conditioned way of being, that doesn't necessarily mean we're going to be able to transcend that conditioning very easily. So I want to encourage everyone to understand that self-love is the most beautiful selfishness that exists in the world, because whenever you're playing with the energy of love, it always transcends self. And we all know that when we feel rested, when we feel nourished, when we feel taken care of, we always have more to give the people in our lives. It is always that way. So prioritize your relationship to self, and trust that by doing so, you will have more love to offer the world. Those you love, strangers at the store, our planet, everything. That's just the nature of love in my experience. It's a pure positive force.
Yeah, as you were speaking, I was remembering back when I led a church. I founded and led a church for about 12 years. I did a sermon once on radical selfishness. And first starting by being honest. We are selfish. This
Yes,
idea that we're not selfish. Even the person who gives, they're giving because it makes them feel good. It is
absolutely.
it is an ultimate selfishness. So we just need to be
Absolutely.
honest and go,
I
we're
agree.
wired to be selfish,
Yes.
and that's
Yes.
okay. Um,
Yes.
yeah. So
Preach, preach.
yeah, just be honest. It drives me nuts. Well, I'm not selfish. Oh, really?
Just
We
be honest
are, and
about
we're
everything, right? Like
right.
that is the glitch for so many of us. We are not just willing to be honest about what we are actually feeling, what is actually going on inside of us. And one of the ways this frustrates me beyond any other is just the general unwillingness in all of us to acknowledge our hypocrisies. When I look at this world, we are all judging one another for the exact same things that we are all doing, right? And
Yes.
it's just insane. It's like, just acknowledge it. Just say, you're right. I am judging you right now for judging someone else about this thing, and yet I'm judging you about that same thing, and this is my
Right, right.
hypocrisy showing up in this moment. And how would we change the dynamics in conversations with one another if we were just willing to say, "Oh, I'm acting like a total hypocrite right now." So instead of needing to be right, instead of this insistence about being right and righteous and what I have to share, I'm just going to acknowledge my hypocrisy and make myself available to actually learning and receiving new information and then processing it in that way. How would our conversations with each other change if we were just willing to do that?
Yeah, just dramatically. I'm just being open to maybe not knowing. And we know
Yeah,
less than we think we know. I've
so
had
much
conversations.
less.
Yeah, I think my podcast that's going up before yours was with a physician, and we were talking about like the human body, and science thinks it knows everything about the human body. It knows
Yeah,
nothing,
I know,
hardly
I know,
anything. Hardly
I
anything.
know.
So it's like, let's just be okay with not knowing. It's not like we
Yes,
have to have the answer in order to feel. I think we think that we have to have the answer in order to feel safe or secure. And that if we
yeah,
don't have the answer, then maybe we feel like the ground we're on is not steady. But it's all false anyway. So just admit it. We don't know most of what we think we know.
yes,
So we're holding on to these ideas and positions as if it's true. If we could just kind of take these clenched fists and just open them just a little bit and allow something else to come through, then we can start relating. And that's what we
yes.
need to start doing, is start relating again as a community, as families, as a nation, as a world. And you've got a lot of following on social media. I think that's fabulous. And you probably have people that are there supporting your message. But boy, if you spend much time on social media, that's where people's claws come out in absolutely
Absolutely.
unbelievable ways. That you're stupid, you're this, you're that. It's like, wait a minute, I'm just asking a question.
Exactly. It's insanity. That's actually why I don't spend much time on social media anymore. It's like, I understand that there's good and bad, for lack of a better word, everywhere, and that we can be really intentional about how we're curating our social media, and certainly intentional about how we're choosing to show up in that framework. And really, if you're announcing yourself as a love advocate, then
Yeah.
be a love advocate, right? Like, but I also think that, yeah, people are just too uncomfortable being so nasty there. It's just insane, because I going back to just this notion of selfishness and love in action. It's like, we all want to feel good as human beings. That is a desire that
Mm-hmm.
is never going to leave us. And obviously, the reality of being human in this world, in this lifetime, is that things don't always feel good. I mean, there's very real pain here, there's very real grief here and struggle, and that's part of this experience as well. And yet, we are not going to stop desiring feeling good. And I also believe we all know in our bones that nothing feels better than to give and receive love. So we all want to be loved, we all want to share love, and yet we're constantly justifying bad, quote unquote, bad behavior, unloving behavior, lack of compassion, being unkind. We're constantly justifying these actions, even though they're counterproductive to what we want to feel
Mm-hmm.
most deeply.
Mm-hmm.
So make it make sense, Reverend Carol.
I I think we've been dropped into a dimension that doesn't make a lot of sense.
Yeah, it doesn't make
So
sense.
the only thing we can do is try to make our own lives make sense and try to be
Yeah.
people who people can go, hey, they make sense.
Yeah. And as you said, just be more honest with
Yeah.
what's real for us in the moment, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah. One of the things that you touched, well, you talked about how we all want to be loved and we all want to be seen. You somewhere in your book, I read that what you want more than anything is to be free, and I share that. Do you think that most people want to be free, and that we're just kind of blind to it?
Well, dude, you know what? Here, these are the things coming to me right now. What
Yeah.
I feel ultimately, I see us as different energy centers, and maybe those different energy centers, it's all one consciousness, but I see a distinction between what my heart wants, what my soul wants, and what my mind wants. So, my soul, which for me is like the most peaceful energy center within me, doesn't give a crap about anything. It's That's how I see it. Like my soul is just observing. It's just
Uh-huh.
bearing witness. It's here to learn. It's been on this trip before in different variations, and so it's just watching. And that place within me is never struggling. It's never suffering. It's just this peaceful, grounded, observant place. So I don't see that place within me as wanting anything.
Uh-huh.
It's just watching. My heart center, the energy center of love for me, is just love, 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 love. More love, just love, just love. That's all my heart is ever inviting me to do. And so I'm like, even that person, my heart's like, yeah, even that person. Like, but, no buts. Just love, just love, just love. And then my mind, of course, wants 1,000 different things all the time, right? And so often those wants aren't necessarily rooted in what I feel like my overall being needs. So does that make so it's like they're different, they're that nothing feels better than to give and receive love. So we all want to be loved, we all want to share love, and yet we're constantly justifying bad, quote unquote, bad behavior, unloving behavior, lack of compassion, being unkind. We're constantly justifying these actions, even though they're counterproductive to what we want to feel
Mm-hmm.
most deeply.
Mm-hmm.
So make it make sense, Reverend Carol.
I think we've been dropped into a dimension that doesn't make a lot of sense.
Yeah, it doesn't make
So
sense.
the only thing we can do is try to make our own lives make sense and try to be
Yeah.
people who people can go, hey, they make sense.
Yeah. And as you said, just be more honest with
Yeah.
what's real for us in the moment, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah. One of the things that you touched, well, you talked about how we all want to be loved and we all want to be seen. You somewhere in your book, I read that what you want more than anything is to be free, and I share that. Do you think that most people want to be free, and that we're just kind of blind to it?
Well, dude, you know what? Here, these are the things coming to me right now. What
Yeah.
I feel ultimately, I see us as different energy centers, and maybe those different energy centers, it's all one consciousness, but I see a distinction between what my heart wants, what my soul wants, and what my mind wants. So my soul, which for me is like the most peaceful energy center within me, doesn't give a crap about anything. That's how I see it. Like my soul is just observing. It's just
Uh-huh.
bearing witness. It's here to learn. It's been on this trip before in different variations, and so it's just watching. And that place within me is never struggling. It's never suffering. It's just this peaceful, grounded, observant place. So I don't see that place within me as wanting anything.
Uh-huh.
It's just watching. My heart center, the energy center of love for me, is just love, 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 love. More love, just love, just love. That's all my heart is ever inviting me to do. And so I'm like, even that person, my heart's like, yeah, even that person. Like, but, no buts. Just love, just love, just love. And then my mind, of course, wants 1,000 different things all the time, right? And so often those wants aren't necessarily rooted in what I feel like my overall being needs. So does that make so it's like there are different directives depending on where I'm living. And then there's the body, like what are your body's needs versus your body's wants? Like when I'm really honoring what I feel I need, that's time in nature, connection with other open-hearted individuals, a lot of quiet and alone time. These I think are needs versus wants. And those when I'm actively meeting those needs, I tend to feel more grounded and more okay in my being, in my reality. So I forget what your question was.
Yeah, no, I think that's all
But
fabulous. I actually, my question was about being free
oh,
and
gotcha, gotcha.
yeah, but I love everything you just talked about because I actually think that freedom, well, first of all, let's define it. To me, it's about being unburdened, authentic,
Yeah,
not having to wear all of the layers, being free of
yeah.
all of the conditioning, getting down to our raw nature, which allows us to love. To me, that's what freedom is.
I resonate deeply with everything you how you just defined freedom. And what I would say to that is for me like part of freedom is also just accepting the parts of me that may never transcend my conditioning, accepting the parts of me that may never accept all the other parts of who I am, right? Like we want to be free, we want to be accepting, but are you willing to accept the parts of you that can't accept all of
Yeah,
who you
yeah,
are? Like,
yeah,
can you accept the parts that will never be free? Like that's real freedom. Because I
yeah,
believe there
yeah.
are aspects of my personality that will always be bound to conditioning. And it's like, okay, you have a place at the table too. Like I want that's the kind of freedom I'm seeking is like a freedom that allows for everything, even the most imprisoned parts of me. Like that's freedom.
Okay, I love love that, and I love the image of they can all come to the table. So this comes back full circle to self love, and and one of the things when we were talking about forgiveness is also like forgiving ourselves. And you also shared that you had. I want to bring this up because I think this is fairly common. When we think we could have done something more, when we think we could
Mm-hmm.
have been better, we could have said something, we could have convinced that person, to not
Yeah.
harm themselves, and this unfortunate thing happened. And then we go into this kind of self-loathing
Mm-hmm.
about that. Like I was
Yeah.
inadequate, I didn't do enough, I could have, I had more power and I didn't use it. And you talk about that when you also talk about your parents and how you felt that at one point that you thought you could have done better to convince your mom to stop working so
Right.
she wouldn't have been
Sure.
in that situation, and you walked through that whole self-forgiveness process, which I think is so important for self-love and also freedom, and also being okay with all the parts of us that that aren't free.
Yeah. I mean, I think that for me, the self forgiveness path is the same as the forgiving of others path. It's like I access empathy first and foremost. It's like I think it's extremely common and human if you lose a loved one or something tragic happens to someone you know, and to potentially think about could you have done something else to help stop this from happening. Like that's a normal thing, right? A common thing that we do. But then also, like if we're going to look at ways to forgive ourselves, then empathize with yourself in that place at that time. You know who you were in that moment, what you were experiencing in that moment, how hard your life was in that moment. So you actually can put yourself into I can put myself into the body and experience of the 14-year-old Scott who lost his parents. I know exactly what was happening in my life at that time and what I was going through, and I can look at how there was really nothing I could have done Like my mind, our minds want to beat us up and abuse us and tell us and shame us for not being everything we could have been. But when I'm in my heart, when I'm in love and acting with the voice of love, I can reflect on myself at that time and say, hey, honey, you were a 14-year-old kid doing and the thing about doing the best that we can do, I think that can be a hard pill to swallow if we're looking at our lives and we're seeing, well, all I did yesterday was just hang out in bed and watch TV and smoke pot. Am I saying that's the best I could have done that day? And yet, had it not been, you might have done something else. So, can we hold ourselves available to that notion, no matter what choices we were making, that in that moment, that's how we were able to show up as best we could and to give ourselves a lot of grace for it? Or even if we choose to reflect on that, like, I didn't do the best that I could do yesterday, can we remind ourselves that, hey, we're human and we can't always do our best? It's like I can look at it from both angles. Either I can say, hey, we're always doing our best, or that we can't always do our best. No human being can always do our best. And can I offer myself a ton of grace in just honoring, hey, you're human, honey. It's okay. Maybe tomorrow you'll do better. But either way, where I get to with that is self love. And ultimately, I believe that we're seeking so much of what we're trying to do in our lives and on this spiritual path and the choices we're making, we're doing it because we believe that it's going to create for ourselves a better relationship to who we are. But why not just commit in this moment to loving ourselves no matter what, and not having it be predicated upon achieving anything to get us to a place of loving ourselves. And then suddenly we're living in it now instead
Yeah.
of waiting for it based on future actions. Does that make sense? Everything I just said? Is it?
It does. It does. And as you're talking, I was thinking, let's just say I do something or I don't do something, and I get upset at myself because I could have done better. Okay, so then, what is the lesson out of that? Well, one of the lessons is I need to love myself. you know,
That's
like
always a lesson. That's
right.
always one of the lessons.
So if I go through the rest of my life loving myself, no matter
Yeah,
what I do or don't do, that's a great thing that happened out of
exactly.
my not doing that or doing it and recognizing that about myself.
Exactly. It's yet again another invitation in the moment to be kind to yourself, to shine compassion on yourself, to love yourself. We are being given these invitations constantly, and every time we have awareness that where we are in our mind is in self-abuse or self-shaming or in self-loathing, the moment we have awareness that that's what's going on is the moment we can offer ourselves something different. And ideally, that something different is compassion, love, grace, kindness, right? So we're being given these opportunities all the time. And the more willing we are to step into that self love and take action in alignment with that willingness, this is how we create change and transformation in our lives, as
Yeah.
I see it.
Yeah, I think so. I think that when we are actively loving, that we are impacting like the consciousness of the whole planet. Like
A
it's
hundred
not just a
percent.
small little thing here. It's affecting everybody. And I was telling this to a friend of mine who is she's kind of feels very tortured about the conditions that animals are in, particularly in the animal agriculture business. And I was telling her that my thought was, okay, we can kind of dwell in this place of suffering. And I think there's something valuable about knowing what's true about someone else's suffering. But if we can get to this place of being love again, that we're raising the consciousness on the whole planet, and that will help everybody. I mean, that helps
Yeah.
anybody who's in any kind of distressing situation. I don't know if that makes sense, but if you can either actively go help this thing over here, but if you can't do that, then you can be over here, right, raising the vibration of the planet,
Absolutely.
which I think
Absolutely.
impacts what's over there.
I agree 100% with what you just said. Absolutely. And why wouldn't you? Because also, first and foremost, you are going to be of service to yourself and your lived experience here, which is naturally going to forget about affecting the whole planet, which I do believe it does. It is all energy,
Yeah.
right? But first and foremost, it's going to affect everyone in your immediate vicinity, all your loved ones, your relationship to everything else. So 100%. And also, I think it's important to remember that our misery is not the thing that helps people out of their misery. That is not how it works. Like, staying steeped in the idea that everything here is terrible, and because everything is terrible, I am going to be miserable because it would be unconscionable to experience joy in the face of so much suffering. What is that doing? Like, how is that helping people out of their struggle and out of their misery? It's human to do that, and it's okay. We all do that in our own ways at times, but I think we have this misguided notion that it's not okay to also celebrate our joy and our victories and our wins when there's so much suffering out there. And I believe ultimately that we need more joy now than ever
Mm-hmm.
because there's so much suffering and struggle out there, and someone else's joy does not in any way contribute to the suffering of others. What it does is it just reminds us that we're also here to experience and honor other energies as well, right?
Yes.
Like,
Yes.
it's all existing in every moment at the same time. So if all I'm seeing is suffering and misery, then I know that it's time for me to expand my lens. And none of this has to be done from a place of denial. None of this is about denying what's happening. None of this is about bypassing what
That's what I
you're
was going to ask you
feeling.
about.
It's not
Yeah.
about bypassing any. I think that some of us spiritual folks, and I myself included at times, get so hung up on not wanting to spiritually bypass that we end up bypassing all the beauty here. We're so focused on, like, I have to honor the struggle and my own internal suffering and all of this stuff, which, yes, to a point, but then you miss out on the fact that we also live in a wildly abundant, compassionate, loving, creative existence. And why would I not be opening myself to the fullness of that expression as well? It doesn't make sense.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, can kind of see that. I talk to people who have near death experiences, and whether you believe in them or not, they talk about a life review. And I could just see getting a life review and being like, you forgot to see the beauty.
Yeah.
you know, like,
Well, isn't that
like,
what so many, when they do interview people on their deathbeds and what are your regrets? The number one regret is always some version of that. I forgot to give energy to the things that light me up.
yeah,
Right.
yeah.
So
I'll do it now.
it's never too late to
It's never
start.
too late. I know. I love
Yeah.
that. So there are so many interesting stories that you tell in your book. You've commented on the cult experiencing you have. Some of my favorite stories that you told was the movie that you made, and also the raw, honest experience you had with the middle seat on the airplane. I
Yes.
love that. And let me see, there was another one. Oh, I thought there was a great letter that you wrote. You had your fear within
From
you wrote
fear.
to you.
Yeah.
Those were a couple things that kind of came up for me that I thought we might want to talk about. So, do you want to touch on the movie, or do you want to bypass that one?
Oh no, I'm happy to talk about anything. Yeah. I mean, I wrote a movie called The Oogie Loves and the Big Balloon Adventure. It was independently produced and financed and made it onto more than 2,000 screens in the US. So it had a very wide release and is still to this day the lowest grossing wide release movie in history, which is to say I wrote the biggest flop of all time.
Aw.
And I can genuinely laugh about that now. It wasn't as funny,
Oh, I'm sure that was
back
so
in the
painful. Yeah, yeah.
it was really painful and embarrassing and all of these things. And that chapter in the book, it's called Flop, and the I tell the story of the movie and the movie, bombing. And but the focus of the chapter is looking at how we define success and how we define failure, and how so often we attach these definitions to monetary success. And for me, the movie would be successful if it made money, and all of these things that we tend to to define success by. And what I explored in that chapter is I invited us all to look at those definitions and how do we define success in our lives. And that when I'm really clear and honest with myself about what I see as success, for me, that tends to look like more love, more compassion, more connection, more self love. Like, this is truly what I see when I see myself as a successful human being. It's like, how loving am I being? How forgiving am I being? And yet, and that is the truth. That is what I really believe. And yet, even with Big Love, when Big Love first came out, which was 7 years ago, it's like, and it didn't sell as well as, the publisher was hoping or I was hoping. And so I immediately went into the same cycle in my ego that I went with the movie didn't do as well. And so suddenly I'm seeing, my mind is seeing myself as a failure and, lacking, and the book isn't blah, 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 all of these stories. And I bring this up just to say, it's so easy to get thrown out of alignment with what we know in our hearts to be true the moment the outside world responds differently. And so for me, part of this path of getting clear in my heart, getting centered in love, is we're constantly being triggered by the outside world. We're constantly being shown places where we're actually not living in alignment with what we know to be true in our hearts. And so for me, every time that happens, it's an invitation to ask yourself, well, what is love inviting in this moment? How is love inviting me to reflect on my experience right now? What does my heart have to say about this experience right now? And whenever we ask ourselves those questions, it's an invitation to get us back in our hearts, get us back in the energy of love, and to reflect on the experience through the eyes of love. And whenever we do that, whenever I do that, I'll speak for myself. Whenever I do that, I feel so much more grounded in what I know to be true beyond all of the misinformed lies of my ego and mind. And so that the story, and it goes beyond writing a movie. Not everyone has the experience of writing a movie who gets on the big screen, but we all have the experience, or we all do to some extent, of sharing some part of ourselves that doesn't get received by others in the way we hoped it
Yes.
would be received. And what do we do with that pain? What do we do with that rejection? What do we do with that judgment? And how do we internalize it? And then how do we allow our mind to internalize it, to tell us and convince us that we are somehow less than, we are somehow not worthy, we are ugly, we are disgusting, we are stupid, right? And this is part of the human journey that we're doing daily. Right? It's like every day we're being given something that our mind wants to use to tell us we are not enough. And if we choose to, each time that happens, we can use that as an invitation to say, well, what does my heart have to say about this? What does love have to say about this? And is this true, what my mind is saying? Am I certain that I'm unlovable and a hideous monster? Or is that just another story that my mind is telling me because my mind, my ego, wants to stay in control? And whenever I'm in my heart and in love, my ego feels totally out of control and needs to come up with some other ideas that it can use to stay in control. That's part of how I experience all of this.
Yeah, well, the telling of that story, again, it was so authentic and so like nothing is hidden. And I think it really touches on the hearts of everyone because you're right. I mean, we all have some experience where we're like sharing ourselves, like, here I am. And
Uh-huh.
somebody, looks at us, or uh, the class laughs at us, or the teacher makes
Yeah.
fun of us, or, the critics pan us, or whatever. And it's like, I just said, here I am. And
Yeah.
and then, our heart's like, oh, that
Yeah.
hurt. That hurts so much. And I
Yeah.
think we've all had that, whether we're a child or an adult. And so to kind of walk through that experience with you, I think it's really, really helpful. I also think that this, of course, is not about you, but I also think that there's something in it to learn about. If you don't like something that somebody does, how can I be loving in my in my comments? I mean, people are just so mean.
Right,
You
but
know,
that starts from within as well. Like if you can, because you're someone who can't be, when I see what's happening out in the world,
yeah,
Carol, what I
yeah,
see is just a world of people mired in self-loathing because you
yes,
do not, if you are in loving relationship with yourself, you do not attack people the way we see everyone attacking each other. It's just not what happens. It's not, it's someone who is really self-loving does not act that way. It's just not what goes on. And
right,
so for me, that is again why I feel like it is so important to prioritize your relationship to self, because it is going to inform how you show up. And by the way, I'm one of the most loving people I know, and I'm one of the most self-loving people I know, which is also, to be very clear, not to suggest I am not also, my mind is not very self-abusive. It is, and also not to suggest I'm not, my mind is not incredibly judgmental of others. It is, absolutely. But I think where the self-love, my commitment to love and self-love comes into play, it's in how I'm choosing to show up despite what my mind is saying. So as an example, I'm on social media, someone writes a comment that I just think is like abhorrent, like honestly, like awful. And my instinct, my mind's instinct, is to get on my keyboard and be like, you miserable mofo, I can't believe, right? It just wants to attack and shame and right. And it's like, so I recognize that's what every mind does. I'm not going to judge myself for that because I just know that's just a human mind doing what a human mind does. But how are you going to choose to respond? Are you going to react from that place of judgment and rage and anger and shaming? Or are you going to take a beat, and if you decide to respond, share everything you feel called to share, like make the case for whatever you feel like you need to make the case for, without losing connection to the humanity in the other person. And
mm-hmm,
that's what I
mm-hmm.
feel like the invitation of love is. It's not to be silent if you feel called to speak. It's just to maintain compassion for the person you feel called to speak to. And this doesn't happen generally if we're just reacting. It's like that, Viktor Frankl, the famous quote from his book Man's Search for Meaning, if you're familiar with that.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know who Viktor Frankl was in a concentration camp
Right, right,
and
mm-hmm.
still figured out how to find meaning within that horrific experience? And he writes something like, your power lives in stimulus and response. That moment between stimulus and how you're responding is where all your power lives. So are you going to choose in that beat to center yourself in your heart and respond from that place and create in that choice the possibility of actual loving dialogue? Or are you going to choose in that space between stimulus and response to just react and be a jerk and be angry and shaming and contribute nothing positive to the potential for actual communication and dialogue? So,
Yeah, and as you say that, okay, so now I'm reminded when I see those kinds of comments to just recognize that the person's just responding to the stimulus. They forgot to take a pause.
absolutely. And they're also bringing to that response their entire lived experience, which is what helps me stay in my heart when I'm looking at how others are responding. What I remind myself that is, if I had lived their life, walked in their shoes, there's no way I could say for sure that I would not have arrived at the exact same place that they've arrived at
Yeah,
now, that I
yeah,
see as so offensive or horrific. Like, I might make this exact same choice had I lived their life. And what
yeah.
that does, it just allows me to stay in empathy. It allows me to stay in compassion. And again, to be clear, none of this is about you staying silent if you feel called to speak up. It's just about staying committed to speaking up with compassion still. This is how we create change. If all we're doing is raging at each other, all we're going to find ourselves is in another state of rage with just a different face on it, right? It's not going to be with any sort of connection and community. It's just going to be more of a scream at each other, but it might look a little different.
Yeah, like it's my hope that things are getting extremely raging now so that we can make another choice, so that we can see
Yeah.
it so clearly. Like it's like it used
Yeah.
to be a
And
little
we
more
all,
background. Now it's like so on our face. And at some point we all got to just go, you know what? I'm going to lay this down. I don't like this. I'm going
I
to choose
don't
something
want that. I
else.
don't like this. It feels awful. Like
Yeah,
this
none of
feels
us really
awful.
want it.
And everyone is complaining about how all of this feels. So all you ultimately have control over is how you're choosing to show up within the context of everything else. What are you modeling? What example are you leading with? That's where your power lives. And it
Yeah.
matters.
Yeah, so I think your message, I think that who you are on this planet, your book. Oh, and I might add, I did watch not all of your movie, but a good part of the movie because I put down your book to watch a movie, and it's on YouTube, and it only has thumbs up. So I just want to let you know that it only has thumbs up on YouTube.
Well, thank you. Maybe you can't see the thumbs down. I don't know how that
No,
works,
there's no
but
thumbs down. And for anybody who's just wondering about this movie, it's a kids movie. It's kind of like a Teletubbies kind of movie to me.
absolutely, it
it's a
is.
kids movie.
It's
I don't
similar.
know what
It's for 3 to 5
problem
year
was.
olds.
It yeah, it was a little kids movie. I know what people are expecting. It was a little kids movie with little characters doing cute little things and singing songs. How can that be so bad?
Well, thank you on behalf of everyone involved with the film. I thank you.
Yeah, I didn't get it. I didn't get all the critiquing. Is what I'm saying. I didn't get all that. So I think everyone just had a bad day or something. So okay. Gosh, we're coming up on the hour. I think we can keep going, but I do want to give you the last word. And if there's anything that we didn't cover, I do think you're. I just want to say, I rarely plug books, but what I love so much about this is it was just so authentic. And I think when people aren't used to what authentic communication is and not hiding anything and just like, this is the path I went down and I'm not proud of it, or this is what I learned out of this, or this is who I am now. And that's what I think is so powerful because if we can, it's like a blueprint for that. And so if we can see Scott Stabile doing this, it's like, oh, okay, I see the power in this. And then I can do that too. I don't have to hide my stuff either. I can talk about the guy I judged in the middle seat of the airplane too, and how that
Yeah.
affected me and what I saw about myself, and not have to go, not have to hide it. So
Yeah,
thank you for
I
all that.
really thank you for sharing that, and I'm really happy that that was your experience with the book because ultimately, I feel like if I am in my head thinking I can't understand how that person could ever have done that, I know there's more work for me to do because I know that if I get really honest with myself, there is somewhere inside of me that can understand how that person could have done that because we all have human minds, we all have similar impulses, we all know the range of human emotions. And we all know what it's like not to be motivated by the most loving intentions, right? We can all be mean and nasty and unkind and envious and jealous and all of these things. This is the nature of having a human mind. So the more honest we get about it with ourselves, the more compassionate we can feel for others who are exhibiting those same things. And maybe this is one way we can bridge, create a bridge to more honest, loving connection, I
Yes.
guess the one thing I would say also is just to remind people that none of what we're talking about, it's never too late again. It's always what we do from this moment on that matters the most. So if you've spent 3 decades in a self-loathing relationship with yourself, here you are right now. What do you want to create differently? You know, what are you willing to love yourself like never before? If your answer to that is yes, then what might that look like? Write a list. How can I go about loving myself like never before? And each day just play with one thing on that list, and start being more intentional about all of this stuff. And for me, it's all a skill. Self-love is a skill. And like any other skill, the more you practice at it, the better you become. You know, so it's all within our power.
We're very powerful. I just want to close by saying that you're sitting in Palm Springs, California, you said, is that right?
I am right now, yeah.
I'm in Wisconsin. We're doing this on a computer, but
Yeah.
but I feel your heart. I feel your
Thank
heart
you. And I yours.
through all
Thank
of this. And so I just think that's the miracle of this, because I'm not really big on online communication. I have to do it for my podcast, but I feel your heart. And so thank you so much for generously sharing it with us today.
Thank you, Reverend Carol. I feel your heart too, and I appreciate all you're doing for our world.
Yeah, well, we got to go out there and love. We got to go out there and love. All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And I now close the Spiritual Forum.